Salutations, dear listener, and welcome to Bible Geometry the Third. This time we're taking a look at Solomon's Temple and many of the measurements you'll see surrounding it, including numbers related to Solomon's reign, Solomon's house, Hiram's temple ornaments, etc. This is the longest one that I have, so I may talk a little bit more swiftly in this one, not just for my sake in putting this together, but also I mean to take pity on your ears. So let's jump in. And I may risk coloring your opinion of these things too much by saying this up front, but I do want to give you something to look out for as we see these measures. It seems that Solomon's temple has a lot to say about the moon, and of all of these 5 measured things in the Bible, this is the one I associate most closely with the moon. Well, the first thing to get out of the way in these history books of the Kingdom of Israel is that you can find these in 2 places. So please pay attention to what chapter of what book I'm referencing before you go trying to find it in your Bible. You can read about this variously in 1 Chronicles chapter 28 or 1 Kings chapter 5. Seeing as this was a magnificent building of the ancient world, we naturally have to ask where the idea of it came from, so let's take a look at this. This is David speaking to his son. As for me, I had in mine heart to build an house of rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord and for the footstool of our God, and had made ready for the building. If you saw my last presentation, you know the geometric significance of the Ark of the Covenant and what it contained. And to be very clear, the thing David wanted to construct was the footstool for our God. Where else have we heard that? Isaiah prophesies, "Thus saith the Lord, the heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that ye build unto me, and where is the place of my rest?" It's a very odd thing for Isaiah to ask, seeing as David already answered that hundreds of years ago. And Jesus himself, "But I say to you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King." And again in Psalm 99, "The Lord reigneth, let the people tremble. He setteth between the cherubims, let the earth be moved. Exalt ye the Lord our God, and worship at his footstool, for he is holy." Now, the way Psalm 99 is written and worded, I certainly understand where they're getting this, but if you consult a Septuagint Bible, you might find that they give credit to David for being the author of Psalm 99. I don't know about that, but if it was David, you think we might accuse him of being a little schizophrenic, but really, consult these 4 verses and look very closely at what's being said. This will come up again in Ezekiel's city, but somehow the temple and the earth are both God's footstool. So this is strange. How can God's footstool be at once a building and also the earth? Well, I think that's part of what this temple is communicating to us, as we will see. There in Psalm 99, we're told to worship at his footstool. Well, that certainly makes sense if his footstool is the temple or the Ark of the Covenant, let's say. I urge you to continue this series because something very exciting happens with this throne and footstool thing in Ezekiel's city. It is one of the most marvelous verses in our Bible. Verse 11, "Then David gave to Solomon his son the pattern, and the pattern of all that he had by the Spirit." Well, look at that. It wasn't David's invention after all. He had it by the Spirit. "All this," said David, "the Lord made me understand in writing by his hand upon me, even all the works of this pattern." There's something else to contemplate. The Lord made David understand this pattern in writing, and that's exactly what you and I are doing in this presentation. We're trying to understand this pattern in writing. Of course, it was not delivered to us in the form of charts or blueprints, but in the words of the Bible. But we're talking about David's pattern. What does Solomon have to do with this? 2 Samuel chapter 12, "And David comforted Bathsheba his wife, and went in unto her, and lay with her, and she bare a son, and called his name Solomon. And the Lord loved him. And he sent by the hand of Nathan the prophet, and he called his name Jedediah, because of the Lord." You've probably heard Arabs greet each other. They say salam, and that means peace. The Solam man would be the man of peace. That's what Solomon's name means here. Jedediah, though, means beloved of the Lord. We're told that the Lord loved him, and that was David's name as well. It means beloved. This peace idea we looked at in Noah and his ark, but Solomon had a reign of peace, and a very rich reign it was. Solomon's measures are the same as Moses back in 1 Kings chapter 6. And the house which King Solomon built for the Lord, the length thereof was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 20 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits. Or consulting 2 Chronicles, the length by cubits after the first measure was, and a Hebrew cubit is 18 inches, which is 1.5 feet, or exactly half a yard. There are 3.52 Hebrew cubits in a pace, and it takes 7.04 Hebrew cubits to make one of Ezekiel's reed. Once again, many Christian artists have given their hand to creating a dignified representation of Solomon's temple, and boy, that is a big one. You can pause to look at these further at your own leisure, but for the video length, I'll skim through them quickly. I hadn't ever quite considered about the bronze lavers being that big, but that one's almost as tall as that man. Interesting that this artist has chosen to depict 2 cherubim on it. This one's kind of funny with all its historical anachronisms, but I've included it because the pillars are given their names here. That is Jachin on the left and Boaz on the right, but we're looking into the temple. This artist must have read the book very carefully. And here is a cutaway. Once again, I'll take you back to that idea that the square altar there is associated with fire, and the circular basin with water. Alright, when and where does he build it? 2 Chronicles chapter 3. Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem in Mount Moriah, where the Lord appeared unto David his father, in the place that David had prepared in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. And he began to build in the 2nd day of the 2nd month in the 4th year of his reign. Mount Moriah. Does anybody remember what happened on Mount Moriah? 1 Kings chapter 6. And it came to pass in the 480th year, after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziph, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. Okay, so we've got a few numbers to work with here. Do you remember the story of the binding of Isaac? Genesis 22, verse 2. This is God speaking, and he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. I wonder which mountain it was. And please remember that Noah was 480 years old when God issued the warning of the flood. Lots of things falling into sync in this story, and we haven't even started building. On this same Mount Moriah is where God provided his own sacrifice in place of Abraham's only son. Also, it's where God appeared unto David. I don't think it's any accident either that this 480 here is a number we see in the sky in our traditional 48 constellations. Let's look at the exterior like we did with the tabernacle. The picture you're looking at is once again from the 1560 Geneva Bible. And the house which King Solomon built for the Lord, the length thereof was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 20 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits. The interior area gives us our number 12, and the volume of it gives us 360. Let's look at that in feet, the length of which gives us our moon radius number in inches, the width 360 again, and the height, of course, is half of the length, so we get 54 again. And here it is in yards. The porch. And the porch before the temple of the house, 20 cubits was the length thereof, according to the breadth of the house, and 10 cubits was the breadth thereof before the house. We just can't get away from this number 360. The length of the porch is 360 inches. The width is half of that. And the area in square inches gives us our great year number of 648, yet again. And in the perimeter, of course, we have our moon radius number coming up in terms of inches. The outer chambers. The nethermost chamber was 5 cubits broad, and the middle was 6 cubits broad, and the third was 7 cubits broad. For without, in the wall of the house, he made narrowed rests round about, that the beam should not be fastened in the walls of the house. I spoke briefly on this 3-level idea when we went over Noah's Ark, but here I've written the 3 levels like the temple and tabernacle courts. Maybe I shouldn't have used the word courts there, but you get the idea. To enter the tabernacle, you first have to enter into the court itself, then into the holy place, And lastly, into the most holy place. Seems that the temple has that same design. Speaking of the most holy place, and he built 20 cubits on the sides of the house, both the floor and the walls with boards of cedar. He even built them for it within, even for the oracle, even for the most holy place. And the oracle in the forepart was 20 cubits in length, and 20 cubits in breadth, and 20 cubits in the height thereof. So just like the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle, and the New Jerusalem itself, this most holy place is a perfect cube. If you'll go back to my shapes presentation and take a look at the significance of the cube, you'll find the number 216 is also attached to it, that the cube unfolds into a cross, and that it has 6 sides. Let's not forget this number 6 occurring in this presentation. And would you want to guess, the measure of one side of this thing is 360 inches. If we want to take the area of the floor, or the ceiling, or the wall, we get 129,600 square inches. You may want to go back into my time presentation and look at the 4 seasons. That was the number of minutes in a season, though I seem to recall it had another 0 on the end. And the perimeter, unsurprisingly, we got our 144 number. It is 120 feet all the way around. And the volume. We looked at the cubic inches having some import in the tabernacle measures, but this one is quite special. To make the first calculation easy, you might want to do in your calculator 216 squared and see if you don't get 46656. And if we divide that number by our great year number, we get 1800. Back to the outer court, and the house, that is, the temple before it, was 40 cubits long. Let's not forget all the mentions of 40 in the Bible. This is a number speaking to trials or a generation. It is a period of testing, of 40 days fasting, or 40 years wandering. Also, David and Solomon reigned for 40 years apiece. Well, 40 cubits contains 720 inches. The area and the perimeter, if you were to walk around this outer court, would give you 2,160 inches. And our moon is 2,160 miles in diameter. Also, the perimeter gives you 120. So here's our Israelite number 12 for the 12 tribes, occurring all over this temple. And here's the volume. Once again, we get a cubic inches number in the millions, but these numbers don't stop being interesting. I wonder what happens if we divide this by our moon number. Wouldn't you know that we get 64,800? And again, 1/4 of our precessional cycle takes 6,480 years. Let's have a look at the cherubims now. And within the oracle, we're talking about the most holy place, he made 2 cherubims of olive tree, each 10 cubits high, and 5 cubits was the one wing of the cherub, and 5 cubits the other wing of the cherub. From the uttermost part of the one wing unto the uttermost part of the other were 10 cubits. And the other cherub was 10 cubits. Both cherubim were of one measure and one size. The height of the one cherub was 10 cubits, and so was it of the other cherub. And he set the cherubims within the inner house, and they stretched forth the wings of the cherubims, so that the wing of the one touched the one wall, and the wing of the other cherub touched the other wall, and their wings touched one another in the midst of the house. Wow, there are a lot of double cherubs happening. The first mention of that, as far as I know, is the entrance to the Garden of Eden was guarded in this same way. Coming forward, we saw that there were cherubims on the veil that separated the holy from most holy place in the tabernacle. There were 2 cherubim on top of the ark, facing each other with their wings outstretched in this same manner, and the ark and its 2 cherubims are set under these 2 cherubims. And when Mary looked down into Jesus' tomb, she saw 1 angel at the head and 1 angel at the feet. Of course, these cherubs themselves were made of olive tree. You ought to take your concordance and look at the 2 olive trees mentioned in the Bible and see if you can find out who they are. And as a timeline, in the 4th year was the foundation of the house of the Lord laid, in the month Ziph, and in the 11th year, in the month Bul, which is the 8th month, was the house finished throughout all the parts thereof, and according to the fashion of it. So was he 7 years in building it. Yeah, 7 years and 6 months. That time in months is 90 months, or 2,700 days, or 64,800 hours. There's our 648 again. Or 3,888,000 minutes. There's our 3888 that we saw in the tabernacle measures, which is half of our 7776 from the seasonal numbers. And the time, in terms of Solomon's temple being built in seconds, is 280,000 seconds. Now that is a stupendous time measure because 233,280 miles is the average distance between our Earth and our Moon. Or if you want to do the Moon's diameter multiplied by 108, you get that same number. My goodness, why are there so many time measures contained in the dimensions of a physical structure? What is a temple? Do you remember when we talked about that word temp? Yes, we also saw it in tempo and temporal. How about that? Three-dimensional structures that represent time itself. Of course, Solomon did not build this temple all by himself. Chapter 7 begins, "And King Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. He was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass. And he was filled with wisdom and understanding, and cunning to work in all works of brass. And he came to King Solomon, and wrought all his work. For he cast 2 pillars of brass of 18 cubits high apiece, and a line of 12 cubits did compass either of them about. And he made 2 chapiters of molten brass to set upon the tops of the pillars. The height of the one chapiter was 5 cubits, and the height of the other chapiter was 5 cubits. And he set up the pillars in the porch of the temple, and he set up the right pillar, and called the name thereof Jachin, and he set up the left pillar, and called the name thereof Boaz." So the height of these things is given there, but the circumference, being 12, for obvious reasons, gives us 216 inches in circumference. Moon numbers all over. Maybe now you can see why I associate this temple so much with the moon. The 2 chapiters are 90 inches apiece, giving our total height of 23 cubits. Once again, with some of these numbers that I don't recognize, I would not be surprised if there's just something I don't know about in some fundamental part of our universe. I wouldn't be surprised if we found these numbers on the periodic table or in discussions of radiation or magnetism or some other natural phenomenon that I just am not studied on. But the thing we're looking at in these pillars and what the King James Bible calls the chapiters atop them are 2 globes, orbs, spheres on top of a support structure. Have you ever seen these? Or I guess the better question is, do you know what kind of a building these are in? Here you can see that the craftsmen of these pillars took the network not as over the globes themselves, but under them, and of course we have our Israelite symbols of lilies and pomegranates. But these 2 pillars, which are given as Jachin and Boaz, one is the earth, and the other is the heavens. And in both of these starry orbs, they have a golden band around the circumference. Do you remember what the band in the heaven is? That represents the wheel of the zodiac going around our planet. And if you don't know, these are common and I think required in all Masonic lodges to have a representation of Jachin and Boaz. Now Masonry itself is a very esoteric and ungodly religion, and I have no associations with them, and I would caution all of my listeners to look into some of their practices and their weird sacraments, but it is decidedly an unchristian organization. I'll criticize the Masons another time, but I have to give credit where credit is due. They got these pillars exactly correct, except for one detail. Jachin means he will establish. Translated different ways, he will establish it, or established. And Boaz means it is strength, or in it is strength, strength or fleetness. That one doesn't quite fit in with the others. So I think we're going to go with he will establish and it is strength. Jachin was said to be on the right hand, but in some translations you'll find it to the south. If that's the case, then the author would have had to be looking out from the doorway of the temple toward the rising sun. Interesting to think that as the year goes by, the sun drifts further to the south in the winter and then comes back to be furthest north in the summertime. My thinking of this in facing the temple directly east is that only on 2 days a year would the light from the sun reach far back into the Holy of Holies, and that would be on the spring and autumn equinoxes. The Bible has no mention of the effect of sunlight on this temple, but that would be quite natural given the configuration in the construction. So we have to ask, what is being established? What is the it? and where is it being established? And it's repeated so often by our Christian folk. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Remember that pattern that David was working on as a footstool for God. A detail that I didn't get in this presentation was that the chapiters or orbs on the top were covered in a network. A network around the earth. What does that make us think of? Does the earth have a network on it? Well, I have a globe at my house that is traced vertically and horizontally with lines of latitude and longitude in the form of a network. Part of my reason in presenting all this information is to get more minds thinking on these things. Someone surely has been down the same line of investigation as I have, but I've never heard it talked about before. And it's very frustrating knowing that something vital is being communicated here, so I want to get as many minds thinking on this as I possibly can. Continuing on with the temple ornaments, the brazen cauldron, and he made a molten sea, 10 cubits from the one brim and to the other. It was round all about, and his height was 5 cubits, and a line of 30 cubits did compass it round about. It stood upon 12 oxen, 3 looking toward the north, and 3 looking toward the west, and 3 looking toward the south, and 3 looking toward the east. And the sea was set above upon them, and all their hinder parts were inward. That is 12 oxen, 1 for each tribe of the tribes of Israel. Up to this point, I've only mentioned the 4 classical elements one time, but this is worth noting that in the zodiac, or the arrangement of the tribal symbols around the tabernacle, we have a lion, a man, an ox, and an eagle, and these things clearly represent those 4 elements. The lion has a fiery spirit, the ox works the earth, the man, or Aquarius, is the one pouring forth the water, and the eagle flies in the air. So maybe we should consider what these 12 oxen holding up a circular vessel of water mean. Remember the creation story from Genesis, that the firmament was established upon the earth. So if we look at the 12 oxen as earth symbols, above them we have our circle and water, which are 2 representations of the heaven itself. And if you use pi to calculate the difference between diameter and circumference here, you'll see that they have not been very specific in their measures here either. And in diameter, this one is 180 inches. And he made 10 bases of brass, 4 cubits was the length of one base, and 4 cubits the breadth thereof, and 3 cubits the height of it. Once again, these depictions are from the 1560 Geneva Bible. So the length and width, we have our number 72 in inches again, and the height, 54, again, that is half of 108. And in area, we get 36 square feet, and the perimeter given, 24 feet. And the candlesticks of pure gold, 5 on the right side and 5 on the left, before the oracle with the flowers and the lamps and the tongs of gold. That molten sea was 10 cubits across, and there are 10 lamps on either side of the temple. This is the end of the measures of Solomon's temple, but the Book of Kings is not done measuring things. Solomon's house, starting in chapter 7. But Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house. 13 is a very important Israel number as well. There are all in total 13 tribes. We are counting both Ephraim and Manasseh and Levi there. The construction time for the temple in Solomon's house was 20 years total. He spent almost double the time making his own house. And the length thereof was 100 cubits, and the breadth thereof 50 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits. Compare those dimensions to the outer court of the tabernacle from our previous presentation. So there it is in length, and in breadth, and in height we get 54, so that's a quarter of a moon there, and the area within, and the perimeter we get our 54 yet again. And you've been waiting all this time. There finally is the volume of Solomon's house. So now you know. And this is a justified use of the English language. Solomon's houses, porches, measurements. And he made a porch of pillars. The length thereof was 50 cubits, and the breadth thereof 30 cubits. Here's the figure given in the Geneva Bible of the interior of the house with pillars, and there the porch. Again, these numbers are somewhat unfamiliar, though their relations seem to fit. We've talked a bit about God's throne being the heavens, but what about King Solomon? Every king must have a throne. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory, and overlaid it with the best gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round behind, and there were stays on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the stays, and 12 lions stood there on the one side and on the other upon the 6 steps, and there was not the like made in any kingdom. Again 12 lions, one for each of the 12 tribes, and 6 steps. 6 is a number that is very closely related to King Solomon. Here is the most famous painting of Solomon's throne. Many details from the Bible appear accurately in this painting, despite it being anachronistic in other ways, but my favorite detail is in the lower left-hand corner. There's a little monkey with a fan. For our final slide, we have a very important number to investigate. And the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. How about that? Well, let's look at this number 6 a little closely and see what kind of things we can do with it. 6 plus 6 plus 6 is 18, and 6 by 6 by 6 is 216. 12 by 12 by 6,000 gives us our sun diameter number. 36 by 60 gives us our moon diameter. 12 by 660 gives us our earth diameter. And 12 by 12 by 12 by 12 by 1.2 gives us the circumference of the earth in miles at the equator. Now at this point, the critic of my work would say, "You're just playing with numbers." And I have to confess, you've caught me. Yeah, I am playing with numbers, but that's exactly what the artificers of the Bible were doing as well. Or if you want to think of it this way, God himself was playing with numbers when he gave the dimensions of the ark, and of the tabernacle, and of Solomon's temple. Remember that we're looking at a pattern so that God can dwell among us, and that we are to keep the whole form thereof. There's something very significant in the numbers used, and that's why God used these numbers and not some other numbers. Also, the speed of Earth's orbit is 66,600 miles per hour. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 18, here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. What are you talking about? The number of the beast is also the number of a man. And where do we see 666 in the Bible? There's indeed a great deal more to be investigated about Solomon's rule, his house, the temple, and the things contained therein. Things that I'm not quite able to contain in a brief presentation. But I hope that you've gotten something out of this, and maybe your interest in these Bible numbers and measurements has been enhanced a bit. This was the last thing that I measured in my investigation of Bible geometry, and it's really stuck with me. There's so many intricate parts of this, and I've only given the surface level explanation in just laying out the measurements. But these measurements in comparison to one another, and how they relate in a more complex way, deliver revelation after revelation. But thankfully, another author of the Bible has already done half of the work for us. We are going to see a further fulfillment and much more specific analysis of these same numerical ideas when we go over Ezekiel's city. So be sure you don't miss that one, because it's what got me started in this whole investigation. Stay tuned.